Some wounds don't bleed, yet they carve scars deeper than any knife could. Love, for Sarah Mitchell, had always been a fragile promise, something she clung to when the world around her felt heavy. But on the day she uncovered the truth, that fragile promise shattered into a cruel revelation. Love wasn't just a feeling, it was a weapon sharp, deliberate, and aimed right at her heart. What she thought was her safe haven became the battlefield where betrayal hid in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The first signs were subtle, almost easy to dismiss, but Sarah Mitchell had always trusted her instincts, and something inside her whispered that things were no longer the same. She remembered how Daniel used to greet her at the door, his smile softening even the hardest days, his arms offering warmth and a sense of home. But lately, that warmth had cooled, replaced with a distance she could neither understand nor ignore. At first, she told herself it was stress. Daniel had been working long hours, the weight of his projects evident in the lines forming across his forehead. She wanted to believe it was exhaustion, nothing more. Yet there was an unfamiliar sharpness in his voice, a hesitation in his touch, and a hollow look in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. Nights that once echoed with laughter and quiet conversations now stretched into silence. Daniel sat with his phone clutched tightly, his thumbs scrolling with a concentration that shut her out completely. He used to leave his phone carelessly on the table, sometimes even forgetting where it was, but now it rarely left his hand or pocket. If it buzzed, he turned it over quickly, as though shielding its contents from her eyes. Sarah had never been the type to pry, never believed in snooping, but the secrecy pressed against her chest like an invisible weight. She would sit across from him during dinner, studying the way his shoulders tensed when a notification lit up the screen, and she would wonder if she was imagining the shift or if she was finally seeing the cracks in their bond. Even the small gestures had vanished. The morning coffee he always made for her was gone, replaced with hurried movements as he rushed out the door. The calls he used to make in the middle of the day, just to hear her voice, had stopped without explanation. When she asked him how his day had been, his answers were short, rehearsed, like he was reciting lines from a script. The man who once shared his dreams, his fears, and even the trivial frustrations of his life, was suddenly a stranger living under the same roof. Sarah told herself she might be over. People change, relationships go through phases, and maybe this was just one of them. But then there were the nights when Daniel didn't come home at the time he promised. He would send a vague text staying late. Don't wait up, and she would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spiraling into questions she never thought she would ask. The smell of unfamiliar perfume clinging faintly to his clothes one night was the moment she could no longer deny it. Something was deeply wrong. Her heart clenched when she remembered how he avoided her gaze that evening. She asked a simple question, "Is everything okay?" And instead of reassurance, she got a dismissive nod, his eyes darting anywhere but hers. His avoidance spoke louder than any confession. Sarah knew the man she loved was hiding something, and the distance between them was no longer just emotional. It had become a wall she couldn't climb no matter how hard she tried. She noticed how his moods shifted unpredictably. One moment he was overly kind, showering her with compliments that felt rehearsed, and the next he was cold, irritated by the smallest of things. She felt as though she was walking on broken glass, unsure whether to speak or stay silent, fearing that any wrong step would push him further away. The comfort of their home, once filled with warmth and safety, now felt like a stage where she was forced to play her part while he acted out a role she no longer recognized. Friends noticed, too, asking her gently if everything was all right. Their voices dipped in concern. She brushed it off with excuses, defending him, even as doubt gnawed at her from within. Deep down, she couldn't bear the thought of admitting to anyone, least of all herself, that the love she had built her life around might be slipping away. Every time she tried to confront him, words got stuck in her throat. She was terrified of what the truth might be, yet equally terrified of living with the silence that hung between them. Each day, the distance grew more obvious, until Sarah no longer recognized the life she was living. The warmth she once depended on was gone, and all that remained were unanswered questions and the haunting feeling that Daniel was no longer hers, that something or someone else had taken the space she once held in his heart. Sarah never intended to find it. She wasn't searching, at least not at first. But sometimes, the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, no matter how tightly it has been hidden. One quiet evening, while Daniel showered, his phone vibrated against the nightstand, buzzing repeatedly as though demanding attention. Normally, Sarah would have ignored it. She respected his privacy, trusted the unspoken boundaries between them. But something about the way he had tucked the phone under his pillow earlier, something about the tension that had been gnawing at her for weeks, made her hand hover over it. She told herself she would only glance, just enough to quiet the restless storm in her chest. Her breath caught as the screen lit up. A name she didn't recognize appeared again and again. Messages flooding in with a rhythm that felt far too intimate to be innocent. She pressed her lips together, her hand trembling as she unlocked the phone using the code she had seen him type countless times. The screen opened like a door she wished she had left closed. The words were unmistakable, not businesslike, not casual, but laced with affection, hidden promises, and an intimacy that pierced her like shards of glass. Her eyes scanned the sentences, her heart thudding louder with each line. I can't stop thinking about last night. When will you tell her? You're mine, Daniel. Don't forget that. The letters blurred as tears welled in her eyes, but the meaning was cruelly clear. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way Daniel had responded. Short but telling, cautious but undeniably complicit. He hadn't shut it down, hadn't pushed the person away. He was tangled in something secret, something Sarah was never meant to know. She felt her throat tighten, her stomach twist, and for a moment the room tilted as though the ground beneath her had shifted. She closed the phone quickly when she heard the water stop in the bathroom, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The reality of what she had seen pressed against her ribs like a vice. She sat there on the edge of the bed, forcing her face into calmness, rehearsing in her mind how she would act when he walked back into the room. The man she thought she knew, the man she believed was hers, was living a life she had been blind to. And now she couldn't unsee it. The sound of the bathroom door opening pulled her back, and Sarah tucked the phone neatly where he had left it, her hands clutching the blanket tightly as though it could anchor her. Daniel stepped out, steam trailing behind him, his expression casual, unaware that his carefully guarded secret had slipped through the cracks. He smiled faintly, asked her about dinner plans, and Sarah stared at him, her lips curved into a mechanical smile, her heart screaming inside her chest. She wondered if he could hear it, the silence between her words, the betrayal echoing in her mind, the sudden shift in the way she looked at him. She wanted to demand answers, to throw the words in his face and watch his mask crumble. But fear held her back, fear of what he might say, fear of confirming what her heart already knew, fear of stepping into a truth that would shatter everything she had built. Instead, she played along. She laughed when he joked, she nodded when he spoke, and she let him kiss her cheek as though nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Every glance, every touch, every word he offered now felt staged, rehearsed, painted over with a false layer of affection to hide the cracks beneath. The hidden message had opened a door she could never close. And now every moment with Daniel was poisoned by the knowledge of his betrayal. That night, when he turned away in bed, drifting into sleep, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, the message replayed in her mind, each word digging deeper. Each sentence a reminder that she was no longer safe in the love she thought she had. Her world had tilted, her trust had been broken, and the only thing more terrifying than knowing was the question of what she would do with the truth she had uncovered. Sarah had always believed that trust was the foundation of love, the invisible thread that bound two people together through storms and silence alike. But after that night, after the message she wasn't meant to see, that thread had begun to unravel, strand by delicate strand. She told herself she might have misunderstood, that maybe the words weren't what they seemed, that Daniel's distracted manner and hidden phone were nothing more than coincidences strung together by her own fears. Yet deep down, she knew better. Doubt had crept in like a shadow, and once it settled, there was no shaking it off. Every little detail began to stand out. Daniel's late nights became longer, and his excuses thinner. When she asked him where he'd been, his eyes shifted, just for a second, as though searching for the right script before he answered. She noticed how his phone rarely left his side at the table, in the bathroom, even when he pretended to be asleep. Once, when a notification lit up his screen in the middle of the night, he lunged for it so quickly that Sarah lay frozen, her suspicions twisting tighter around her chest. The man she thought she knew so well now felt like a stranger hiding behind a mask. His laugh, once genuine and unguarded, sounded hollow, almost forced. The way he touched her felt mechanical, as though he were playing the part of a loving partner while his heart was elsewhere. Sarah couldn't tell if she was losing her grip on reality or finally seeing it for what it truly was. She tried to give him the chance to prove her wrong. She watched his gestures carefully, waited for the small tokens of love to return: the morning coffee, the soft words before bed, the way his eyes used to linger on her, as though she was his entire world. But none of it came back. Instead, his distance grew sharper, the air between them heavier. When she confronted him lightly, asking if something was bothering him, he brushed it off with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes, dismissing her concerns with the practiced ease of someone who had already rehearsed the lie. That was when the lies began to take shape, not obvious at first, but insidious, layered beneath the fabric of their daily life. He would mention a meeting that never seemed to appear on his calendar. He claimed to have been with a colleague Sarah had never met, the details of the evening changing slightly each time she asked. It was in these cracks, these inconsistencies, that Sarah saw the truth weaving itself together. And yet, the most painful part wasn't the lies themselves, but the way they made her question her own worth. She lay awake at night, staring at the faint outline of Daniel beside her, wondering if she had done something wrong. Was she not enough anymore? Had her love grown stale in his eyes, replaced by something or someone more thrilling, more alive? The betrayal wasn't just in the hidden messages or the evasive glances. It was in the slow erosion of her confidence, the way he made her feel invisible while still pretending everything was fine. Her mind replayed the past over and over, searching for signs she had missed. The weekends he suddenly claimed he was too busy, the birthdays he almost forgot, the way his gaze sometimes drifted when they were out together, as if searching for someone else in the crowd. She realized now that these weren't random slips, they were fractures in a story he no longer cared to keep straight. Still, Sarah kept silent. She told no one, carrying the weight of her suspicions alone, afraid that speaking them aloud would make them undeniable. Friends asked if she was all right, noting the way her smile seemed thinner, her eyes heavier, but she brushed them off with practiced excuses, just as Daniel brushed her off at home. The isolation cut deeper than the lies themselves, trapping her in a prison of secrecy where every thought, every look, every word was filtered through the ache of knowing she was no longer truly loved. The unraveling of trust was slow, but once it began, it was impossible to stop. Sarah no longer saw her relationship as the sanctuary it had once been. Instead, she felt like she was living inside a story she hadn't chosen, one where every chapter brought another deception, another reminder that love could be twisted into something sharp and cruel. And though she hadn't yet confronted him, the truth hovered between them like smoke, suffocating, undeniable, waiting for the moment it would finally ignite. The confrontation didn't come as Sarah had once imagined it might, not with shouting, slamming doors, or the dramatic flair of betrayal laid bare. Instead, it began in a quiet kitchen on an ordinary evening. The kind of night where the weight of silence pressed too heavily to be ignored any longer. Daniel sat across from her, his attention fixed on his phone, fork untouched beside a plate of food that had long gone cold. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap, her pulse a steady drumbeat of fear and fury, until the words slipped from her mouth almost against her will. Who is she? The sound of her own voice startled her. It was calm, too calm, but it carried a sharpness Daniel couldn't pretend not to hear. His head snapped up, eyes locking with hers, and in that split second she saw the flicker of panic he tried to smother. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, buying time, his lips pressed into a thin line, as though searching for the right performance. "You're imagining things," he finally said, his tone light, dismissive. "You've been stressed, Sarah. Maybe you're reading too much into nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and she wasn't imagining it. She had seen the messages, felt the distance, lived in the silence that had been suffocating her for weeks. Still, hearing him say it, hearing him twist her reality into something fragile and uncertain, sparked something inside her. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was manipulation, an attempt to turn her own doubts against her. Her hands clenched into fists under the table. "Don't do that to me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't make me feel like I'm losing my mind. I saw the messages, Daniel. I know what's going on." The mask faltered then, his jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened, and for the first time she saw not guilt, but calculation. He wasn't scrambling to explain, he was deciding which story to feed her next. When he spoke, his voice was smoother, deliberate. "You shouldn't have gone through my phone." The shift stunned her. Instead of denial, he redirected, making her feel like the one who had crossed the line. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization washed over her. He wasn't just lying. He was turning her pain into a weapon against her. The man she once trusted with every part of herself was now using that very trust to break her down, to control her. to make her doubt her own right to question him. I wouldn't have needed to if you hadn't given me a reason, she shot back, her voice trembling between anger and heartbreak. She expected him to soften, to admit, to at least show some sign of remorse. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes cold, his words precise. You're being dramatic. You're twisting things. If you keep pushing like this, you're going to ruin everything. It was no longer a denial. It was a warning. Sarah felt the air around her grow heavier, her chest tight as though invisible hands were pressing down on her. She had thought the confrontation would bring relief, that once everything was in the open, she could breathe again. But instead, it became a dangerous game, a back and forth of truth and deception, where every word was a move on a board she hadn't realized they were playing. Her voice cracked as she asked the question she feared most. Do you love her? The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel's gaze didn't soften. He didn't rush to reassure her, didn't even reach across the table the way he used to when she was in pain. Instead, he looked at her like she was a problem to solve, an obstacle in the way of something he wanted more. His silence told her everything words never could. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. But she held them back, refusing to let him see her break. The confrontation she had once dreaded had revealed more than betrayal. It had revealed who he truly was. And in that moment, Sarah realized that love wasn't being shared between them anymore. It was being wielded like a blade, sharpened by secrets and lies. And she was the one it was cutting deepest. Sarah once believed love was supposed to heal, to anchor her when the world felt unsteady. But in the weeks after the confrontation, she began to see the truth with painful clarity. Love in Daniel's hands wasn't gentle. It wasn't nurturing. It was a tool, sharpened and aimed at her. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made seemed designed not to rebuild what they had lost, but to keep her tethered to him, bound by guilt, fear, and the memory of what their love used to be. At first, she thought maybe he was trying to make amends. He bought her flowers one evening, something he hadn't done in months. But when she reached for the card, the message was cold, almost transactional. Thanks for being patient. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I love you. Just a carefully chosen phrase that shifted the burden onto her shoulders, making her feel as though it was her duty to endure his betrayal quietly. When she tried to talk, he twisted her words, turning every expression of pain into an accusation against her. If she said she felt lonely, he told her she was being clingy. If she questioned his late nights, he accused her of being paranoid. Even her silence wasn't safe. When she withdrew to protect herself, he told her she was the one creating distance. It was a masterful cycle, one that left her dizzy, doubting her own reality, until she caught herself wondering if maybe she was the problem after all. The manipulation was subtle but relentless. He began controlling the rhythm of their life together in small, almost invisible ways. He would decide when they spoke, when they went out, when he would touch her. If she initiated, he pulled away with a sigh, as though she were demanding too much. But if he reached for her, it was never about closeness. It was about reminding her that he still had the power to make her stay. His affection became conditional, doled out like a prize whenever she seemed to bend to his narrative, withheld like punishment whenever she dared to question him. It was in those moments Sarah realized that what she thought was love had become a weapon of control. He no longer needed to shout or slam doors. He only needed to remind her of who he had once been, the man she had fallen for, and dangle that memory like bait. She longed for the Daniel who had made her laugh until she couldn't breathe, who had held her through her darkest nights. But that man was gone. All that remained was someone who wore love like armor when it suited him, and wielded it like a dagger when it didn't. She began to notice how carefully he curated his kindness. In front of friends or family, he was attentive, charming, the picture of a devoted partner. He placed his hand gently on her back, pulled out her chair, whispered jokes in her ear as though they were still inseparable. And Sarah played along, smiling on cue, nodding in agreement, all while feeling the invisible blade of his control pressing against her ribs. When the door closed behind them, the warmth vanished, replaced by silence or sharp words that cut just deep enough to keep her off balance. Each night, lying in the quiet beside him, Sarah felt the weight of the realization settle heavier on her chest. Love wasn't holding them together anymore. It was binding her, trapping her, turning her into a ghost of the woman she once was. Every memory of their happiness had been weaponized against her, used to keep her questioning whether she should fight harder, endure longer, forgive deeper. And yet, she could feel the truth clawing at her from the inside. This wasn't love anymore. It was power, and Daniel wielded it with precision. Still, a part of her clung to the hope that he might change, that the man she had loved wasn't completely gone. That hope, she realized bitterly, was his sharpest weapon of all. It kept her rooted in place, unable to leave, unable to demand more, because she was still chasing the ghost of what once was, even as the reality of what remained hollowed her out from within. The house was silent, but inside Sarah's chest there was a storm. Every breath she took felt like a decision, every glance at Daniel like a reminder of the battlefield their love had become. She had reached the end of the spiral. No more excuses, no more half-truths, no more waiting for a version of him that no longer existed. The weight of his manipulation pressed heavily against her, but beneath it, something fierce was beginning to rise. She had been broken, yes, but in the cracks of that breaking, strength was taking shape. She stood by the window, staring out into the night, the city lights flickering in the distance like signals calling her to freedom. Behind her, Daniel moved about the house as though nothing had changed, humming to himself, dropping casual comments about work and tomorrow's plans, while every word dripped with the arrogance of a man who believed he still had her trapped. He didn't know that tonight was different. He didn't see the way her hands no longer trembled, the way her silence was no longer born of fear but of resolve. Her mind replayed the path that had led her here, the distance, the lies, the confrontation, the weaponization of every memory they had built together. She thought of the woman she had been before him, hopeful, strong, alive. That woman was still in her somewhere, buried under layers of betrayal, waiting to breathe again. She realized now that the love she had clung to wasn't love anymore, it was a chain. And every moment she stayed, Daniel tightened it further. When she turned to face him, her voice was steady, though her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. His eyes flicked to hers, curious, perhaps sensing a shift he couldn't control. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she didn't shrink under his gaze. She didn't let him twist her words or silence her doubts. Sarah knew she had two choices: to remain in the shadows of his lies, letting him continue to use love as a weapon against her, or to step into the uncertain light of freedom, carrying the scars but reclaiming her power. It was a choice that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath her, yet the air beyond promising something she had nearly forgotten: peace. Her fingers brushed against the handle of her packed bag, hidden until now, and she felt the surge of fear and relief all at once. She had no idea what awaited her beyond this moment, no plan for the future, no certainty of what life would look like without him. But she did know one thing: staying was no longer survival. Leaving was not. As Daniel continued to speak, his voice fading into the background, Sarah's hand tightened on the bag. Her chest rose with a breath that felt like the first in years. Her decision etched not in words, but in the silence that followed. She was done being a victim of his weaponized love. She was ready to step beyond the battlefield, scarred but unbroken. Her story no longer his to control.